Hi everyone, my name is Mark Bayley, and in today's talk, Mapping Your Ancestors, I'll be showing you how you can find out more about your ancestors' lives through map-based records and search tools. We'll start with something called Surname Distribution Maps. So whenever you do a search on the Genealogist, you'll find that you'll get the results on the right-hand side and a summary of those results on the left-hand side. So I've started off with a search for the surname Babbage. I've not entered any other things to filter this search. Now if we look down on that left-hand side, you'll find Census and then pick 1841. You'll see there's a link there that says map these results. And if you click that link, you'll be shown a surname distribution map, showing you the origin of the surname Babbage. Here is the county of Devon. Now I've picked the 1841 census because this is before industrialisation, before people started moving around the country. But after you've picked the 41 census, you can actually go through those years of census all the way up to 1911 and see how that map changes over time. And in this particular example, you can see the Babbage family moving through Somerset and up to Gloucestershire. But we also allow surname distribution maps on all our nationwide record sets. So we can pick birth, marriage and death records, which go up to 2005. So if I take a section of birth records between 1995 and 2005 that have the surname Babbage, we can see what a modern day version of this surname looks like. And of course, we can see here Gloucestershire is still prominent, but we also see that Essex has now got a high density of Babbages in. So it's quite nice to see how that map changes over time and even go up to the modern period. Now we'll jump now to one of our first record sets, our earliest record sets for map-based records, 1836, with Tithe Records. Now tithing was where you gave a tenth of your produce to the local clergy, and this had been going on for centuries. Now I think it was about the year 794 when it was made a compulsory tithing rather than a voluntary tithing. And like I say, people have been paying their tithings in kind for centuries. So whether you grew crops or you produced milk or wool and gave a tenth of that produce to local clergy who would store it in those huge tithe barns that you can still see around the country today. But in 1836, the government decided to move to a monetary system because it would be much easier for people to manage, and people were already starting to move towards a monetary system at that point. So they nationalised this. And it meant that they performed a nationwide survey for all tithable land, recording each parcel of land, who was occupying that land, and also who was the landowner. So you got both sides of society, from your land-owning aristocracy to your lowly tenant farmers. And it's great because it didn't just have a survey recording the land, the names, what the land is used for and the size, but you also have maps that go with these records as well. So I'll just show you a quick example. Here we have a tithe apportionment record for Henry Goss Esquire, the landowner, and James Whitehead Perry Esquire, who was the occupier of all these different parcels of land. But if we look at plot 199, we can see a further information. So plot 199 is listed as Burnt Stubbs Farm, and it shows us it comprised of a house, buildings, lawn and a yard, which made up 2 acres, 1 rod and 27 perches. Now if you look at the bottom of the screen, you can also see a total for all those different parcels of land for James Whitehead Perry, and it came to 202 acres, and he was due to pay £43 and 19 shillings tithe rent annually for all those different parcels of land. So that's the equivalent of about £2,600 in today's money. But the important thing here to look at is that plot number, plot 199, which links through to the Tithe Map. And here we can see the Tithe Map, and it's in incredible detail, so we'll zoom right in and you can see there plot 199 listed as Burnt Stubbs Farm, which actually has a rather interesting history. It was a rather nice house, but in the Civil War in the 1600s, it was a Cavalier stronghold, and Cromwell's forces came and burnt it down to the ground. After the restoration, the farmhouse was rebuilt and was given the nickname Burnt Stubbs, which stuck. So we can see here Burnt Stubbs Farm listed on the Tithe Map. So we can go further in time now to the 1880s. We have another map-based record set, Charles Booth's Property Maps. Now Charles Booth was an industrialist and a social reformer. In the 1880s, he started researching the poverty of London, and it was a 15-year project with a tremendous amount of research done, and they produced 17 volumes of this research going into immense detail as to the different sort of social economic areas of London. He found that over 33% of the East End of London was in abject poverty. So he kind of really opened people's eyes to how poorly these people were living in the city. But as part of this research, he created the Charles Booth Poverty Maps. So these are hand annotated maps that have been highlighted in different colours depending on the status of the houses in those particular streets, whether they were upper class through to the middle classes, the lower classes in blue and grey, and finally black for the lowest class, or as Charles Booth put it, vicious semi-criminal. And these maps again open people's eyes, realising that you could just be a couple of streets away from an upper class down to a lower class sort of situation. So we can see here Buckingham Palace, obviously highlighted in yellow as the upper class, and just 2 streets away is Great Peter Street, listed as the lowest class of all, vicious semi-criminal. If we move a bit further forwards in time, we go to the Lloyd George Doomsday, which is a period from 1910 to 1915. Now, Lloyd George needed to raise extra funds for inland revenue, and to do that he introduced a new tax. It was quite a complicated tax based upon the increase in value of your property over time due to public spending, whether that is on new roads and infrastructure or new public services in your area. So it needed to be a very detailed survey of the whole of England and Wales, surveying every single property and parcel of land. So this time it covers even more of the country because it actually includes down to building level rather than just parcels of land. So the surveyors would come and they'd produce a valuation based on your property, and they'd have to separate all the different values out, giving values to your buildings, or whether you've got crops growing or orchards in your back gardens, if you've got any outbuildings. And then the surveyor would come again whenever you were to sell that property or if it was inherited, and they'd note any changes, like I say, any improvements made to the house or any outbuildings built. And if there's any new public infrastructure that they could then obviously tax you on with an increase in value. Now this is a huge survey. There's 95,000 books, and like I say, every single property was included in that survey. And for each survey there was 4 pages dedicated to each property, which we'll see in an example in a minute. So this is, like I say, an immense project for us. We started it a couple of years ago, and we've covered the north of Buckinghamshire, and we've scanned all of the maps for the Greater London area as well. Now, it comprises of 3 sorts of record sets in the Lloyd George Doomsday. You have what was classed as IR 91, the National Archives original reference, which is an index to Westminster and the City of London, which is complete and online on the Genealogist at the moment. You have IR 58, which is those 95,000 field books that I mentioned previously. They are a work in progress at the moment, and like I say, we've released North Buckinghamshire, and we've released about half of London, the north of the river, for IR 58 books. This is a big project that we're working through at the moment in the basement at the National Archives. And just to give you a rough idea of the size of this project, it's about 4 times the size of the 1911 in terms of number of pages to be digitised and conserved. So it's going to take a little while yet to go through the whole country, but keep an eye on our map as we are producing more and more areas as time goes on. And also you can zoom into any of the Lloyd George Doomsday maps for the whole of the Greater London area and North Buckinghamshire. So the National Archives reference for these Lloyd George maps are IR 121 all the way up to IR 135. So if we look at an example, we find here the Right Honourable Arthur Fitzgerald Kinnaird, who was a rather big character in the Victorian times. Not only was he a politician, but he was also involved in the family bank from a young age and made a director. Now this bank merged with others to become Barclays Bank, and he was the main board director of Barclays until his death. He was also the first football star. He popularised the sport. In fact, there's now a Netflix TV series all about the character called the English Game, which came out this year. So he was very prominent in football, in business, and in politics. In fact, in football, he still holds a current record for the most number of FA Cup finals played. So Kinnaird played in 9 FA Cup finals. And he later became a president of the Football Association and was so for 33 years, again, until his death. So here's the IR58 books for one of his properties. It's called Chessington Lodge. We can see there's 4 pages of detail for every single property in the country. It lists the owner, the occupier, usually a really good description of that property, listing any rooms there were, the outbuildings, the state of the house, any orchards or anything else growing in the garden, anything that could increase the value of that property, because they would need to discount that at the time the house was sold or inherited against that tax. So it's really interesting to see all that detail, and then obviously see the valuation of that property as well, so you can see how well off your ancestors were. But again, it's that plot number that's really interesting. So in this case, the plot number here is 10, which relates, of course, to a map. And if we bring up the Lloyd George map for this area, we can see there plot 10 quite clearly listed as Chessington Lodge, and there's a photograph of Chessington Lodge, and it still stands today. So moving on, we have historic Ordnance survey maps. Now these are different layers of maps that you can go through for different periods. So I've loaded up here the 1890s map layer for burnt stubs. So the 1890s layer is a 5 foot to the mile for London, or 6 inch to the mile for the rest of the country. We also have a layer from 1919 to 1947, which shows us Surrey Zoological Gardens, which was built on the grounds of burnt stubs. We then have a 1937 to 1961 layer, again that's 2.5 inches to the mile scale. And we can see now in 1939 where Chessington branch line opens and Chessington South train station opened as well. So you can see that added infrastructure on the map. And then finally we have 1955 to 1961, which is a 1 inch to the mile scale. So using all those different map layers, you can see how an area changed over time as it becomes more built up, for example. So it's really interesting to see those changes. We also have modern maps available. Our sources include OpenStreetMap, Ordnance Survey, and Bing Maps, which also include satellite imagery. So all of these map records that I've talked about so far, we've managed to combine in one single unified interface, and we call it MapExplorer. And MapExplorer is really easy to use, and you can scroll around the country, find an area you're interested in, and find all the records associated with that area. So I can show you an example now, jumping right back to our Tithe Records for Burnt Stubs Farm. As you can see, MapExplorer shows you the map and has pins all across the map, so you can literally click on any of those plots and see who is the owner and occupier, and click to load up the full details of that record. Now, MapExplorer contains multiple layers. So our top layer, we call it the record set layer, is currently there selected to Tithe. But we can change that to one of our other record sets. So if I switch it to the Lloyd George Doomsday record sets, you can see that Burnt Stubs Farm actually is the same place as Chessington Lodge. And then we can move to our historical layer and see Chessington Lodge is obviously the same place as the Surrey Zoological Gardens. We can move up to the base layer, which is our modern day layer. And here you can see a huge amount of infrastructure in the satellite imagery there. And it's also nice to see that you've still got the pins. So you can change your transparency on each of these layers and still see those pins on top of the modern day satellite imagery to see who was the owner of the Tithe record or the Lloyd George Doomsday record. So from the satellite imagery, you can also move to the OpenStreetMaps layer, and you can see this is actually now obviously Chessington World of Adventures. So all the records I've talked about in this talk so far, apart from the Charles Booth property maps, are all for the exact same location, where Chessington World of Adventures was Surrey Zoological Gardens, was Chessington Lodge, and was originally Burnt Stubbs Farm. So now we'll go through the other features of MapExplorer. And firstly, we have a search. So you can search for your own house, for example, using your own postcode or a street address or a town. You can enter any modern address information in that search box to load up a location. It also has the option of loading up historical locations. So you can switch that drop-down box from modern to historical, and it will load details from the 1900s. So you can search for a street name or a house that might not exist today. We also have the ability to jump to a particular county, and once you've jumped to a county, you can then jump to a particular parish. So you can jump straight to that village and see the boundaries of that particular parish. And we can show you boundary lines for counties and parishes, so it's quite handy to see where your ancestor was living if they're in one particular parish or the other in order to find their parish records. And what's quite handy is when you're out and about to load up MapExplorer on your phone, and you can click the Locate Me button, and that will jump to your location within MapExplorer, and you could see who owned the field where you're currently standing, or indeed the property where you're standing in if you pick the Lloyd Doomsday records. So it's quite nice to see, as you're out and about, all those historical records for the precise location where you are. Now, of course, you'll probably want to save these images of the maps or print them off, and you can do that if you click on the blue cog. You have the option there to download the image or print it off on your printer at home. One of our more recent additions to MapExplorer is our image archive. We've pinned over 6,500 images to the map so far, and this is an ongoing project. Now, if we zoom into Liverpool as an example, you'll see there's several pins available, as there are for most towns and cities in the country. But if we click this pin in Canning Dock, you can see it brings up a photograph of a German submarine captured during World War I, and the photo was taken in 1919. If we click to view further details, you can see a modern-day map showing you the position of the photographer, which is handy to see, as well as any secondary and primary subjects indicated on that map as well. So you can see any potential famous buildings or points of interest. On the right-hand side, you can see there's a street view, so you can see what a modern-day version of this area looks like. And as you can see, there's several buildings have been built since this photograph has been taken. We also have war memorials available on MapExplorer. If we stick with Liverpool as our example, we can see here just a couple of 100 metres away from that captured submarine is a war memorial to the Merchant Navy. And you can see there's over 1,000 names listed on this particular war memorial. Again, you can click to view further details about that particular war memorial, or indeed see any names listed on there. And with each name, you're also given photographs, so you can see a zoomed in version of that name listed on the war memorial. There's over 600,000 war memorial records available on the Genealogist to search through, covering the majority of the country. We also have cemeteries available on MapExplorer, so you can view headstone records. And again, you can click on the record set and pick headstones rather than war memorials or image archive. And it displays pins where there's a cemetery that we have photographed and transcribed. This is done as part of our volunteer project, which you can find more about at ukindexer.co.uk. But you can click a pin and view that cemetery's details, and again click to view any records for that particular cemetery, where you can obviously add further search refinement by entering a person's name or date of death. Other record set layers we've recently added include the original Doomsday records from 1086, the 1939 Register, the 1911 Census, and we'll be shortly releasing further census years, so keep an eye on our news page for announcements of those. Now, the MapExplorer actually has another use as well. So whenever you do a search on one of these map-based record sets, such as the Lloyd George Doomsday, you'll see a blue button at the top just before those search results that allows you to view those results on the map itself. So here I'm searching for the Duke of Westminster in London, who was, or still is, a big property landowner in London. So if we click on that button, we can load up MapExplorer. It shows us all central in London. The Duke of Westminster still owns about half of Mayfair and Belgravia. If we look at the Lloyd George Doomsday, you can see that he actually owned a lot of Pimlico, Knightsbridge, Westminster, including Grosvenor Square. So the Duke of Westminster is the Grosvenor family. So if we zoom in, you can see every single property with a green pin indicating that the Duke of Westminster owns all of these properties around Grosvenor Square. So it's really interesting to see if your ancestor did own more than one property, or if you're interested in a particular family name and want to search to see all the properties they owned, you can do that search and instantly indicate on the map where all those properties were.